Let's get started, guys. Starting a little later than normal, so I'm going to speed up on some parts because I'd like to have some more time for discussion. In the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, amen. There's this idea that's been in my mind for a bit about the Pharisees, and it's been sort of reinforced by my readings, my personal readings lately, from the Gospel of St. Luke and the Gospel of St. John. And so I wanted to have that discussion with you today. The main focus of this talk, first I'm going to give you a very general introduction to who the Pharisees were in the historical context, because now we speak a lot about them and we don't necessarily know where they came from or what they actually did. How they responded to Jesus and his ministry, and then in turn how Jesus responded to them as a group. And the main problems of the Pharisees and how can we implement that in our spiritual lives. How can we avoid being Pharisees? What does that even mean, right? Do we have modern day Pharisees? What does that entail and so on? Okay? So feel free to give us advice to make this, conversation more detailed if you have anything to say. So first, who were the Pharisees? The word comes from the Greek Pharisaios, and it basically means one who is separated. What does that mean? One who is separated from what? There's different interpretations, at least from when I did my research. It could either mean separated from the Gentiles, so separated from the world because they're chosen people, right? Of course, we knew the Pharisees were a sect of Jews. Or it could mean separated from the Jews who were not behaving the way they should. Right? So we know that the Pharisees were very much abiding by the law. Some notes here for myself. So the Pharisees were basically a social movement. There were multiple social movements within Judaism. So the Pharisees were one example. The Sadducees were another example that we read about in the Gospels. And the Pharisees and Sadducees actually did not like each other. They had conflict. For example, the Sadducees only believed in the 5 books of Moses, the Torah. Okay? The Pharisees believed in the 5 books. They believed in the prophets, right? Ezekiel, Isaiah. They also believed in the Psalms, the writings. Okay? So they actually had 2 different scriptures. The Sadducees also had some weird beliefs. They didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead, which we believe in, right? And the Jews also believed in. So they had conflict there. And so don't just group them together, when it says the Pharisees and Sadducees, don't just group them together always. They did have different ideas. The Pharisees resisted Hellenization. What that means is they sort of resisted the Greek influence on their culture, right? They were like, no, we are the Jews. Like, sure, Greece and Romans, they own the world, but we're going to retain our culture, right? And so that was a very important thing for them. They claimed authority from Moses. And so we're going to see a few verses where Jesus actually says, or where the Pharisees will say, like, oh, we believe in Moses. We come from Moses, right? Moses gives us this authority. And so they think that because they sort of come from that authority from Moses, Moses is the author of the books, the first 5 books of the Bible, or the Scripture, they think that they have all the right interpretations. Okay? So this matters a lot from when they're speaking to the people what they should and shouldn't do. And we'll see if that actually makes sense or not. Finally, they were very meticulous in their interpretation. So if they think that things should be done a certain way, anyone who does not follow that is automatically doing something wrong, right? So, on the Sabbath, we do no work, right? That's the way they interpreted it. Certain things mean you're working, certain things mean you're not working. If you do anything that's considered work, you are not a true Jew, right? You're breaking the commandment, you deserve to be put out of the synagogue, you deserve to be maybe even killed, right? For going against the law of Moses. So this is the framework here of the Pharisees, okay? Any questions? Yeah.
So the Sadducees were not Pharisees.
Sadducees were not Pharisees.
Okay.
Sadducees were the elite of this time. The Pharisees sort of came a little under that.
Did the Sadducees follow the same law as strictly?
They followed the same law of Moses, strictly the first 5 books. And they were very strict in their following as well, but they had some doctrinal beliefs with the Pharisees.
So were the Pharisees considered to be more like radical than the average Jew of their time? Like, were they respected as like leaders in the society, or were they considered to be like radicals that no one really like those are the Pharisees? We don't know.
So some people saw the Pharisees as actually having Mosaic authority, and they sort of followed them. In terms of being radical, yeah, they were a little radical with how they carried out the law. We see some of that in the verses. But some people followed and some people didn't. That's just how it was. Okay, it's a lot of questions. Okay. Yeah.
Besides sects of Judaism, there's also like vocations within Judaism that are noted, like scribes, for example. So scribes were very it's obvious, like they they transcribed the script, the Torah. That was their job. So like you have like some distinctions between sects within Judaism, but also like vocations within Judaism.
A lot of the scribes were Pharisees. Do you have a question, Sylvia, or comment?
Yes, could we consider them more like a political party?
100%.
And what?
Political party. Yeah.
So like the high priests that crucified Christ were Pharisees? Or not?
They could have or could not have been.
Okay.
It's not entirely.
Okay.
Yeah. But there was no separation of church and state back then for the Jews, so definitely the Pharisees were a political party. Okay? So I like this background, we're all on the same page. Good questions. When we hear the phrase, or when we say the phrase, don't be a Pharisee, I want to say that, like, God forbid you say this to someone, because if you do, it's a very dangerous thing. And think very carefully about what you're saying. Okay? I would say use it very sparingly if you use it at all in your life. So, questions for you. Is someone a Pharisee if when they fast, they read nutrition labels? Show of hands, yes. If when you fast, you read nutrition labels, are you a Pharisee? Raise your hand if you think yes. Okay, raise your hand if you think no. Raise your hand if you're not sure.
I didn't know that was an option.
I did that because not a lot of people raised their hand, but still you didn't raise your hand. Fine. One person said yes, you are. Most of you said no, or half of you said no. What about if you fast at exactly 12 a.m. the night before or the day of liturgy? If you do this, are you a Pharisee? Raise your hand if yes. Raise your hand if no.
The question is very leading.
Abuna is on purpose not answer. Okay.
We're all like looking at
What about if you go to church early and you stand in the front of the nave, which means in front of the congregation? Are you a Pharisee if you do this? Raise your hand if yes. Raise your hand if no. Okay. I'm asking these questions in a certain way on purpose.
Okay.
Okay?
Go ahead.
So we have to reconcile these actions today with who the Pharisees were, right? There is a verse that says, the Pharisees like the front or to be seen when they're praying, right? We'll see if that actually is in line with what I'm asking here, okay? And I ask these questions for a reason. Before you get into anything, unless you're God, do not judge anyone for doing any of these things, okay? We never judge someone and how they're approaching their spiritual life, whether that's fasting, what they're eating or time, where they're standing in church, how they're praying in church, or how they choose to carry out their spiritual lives, okay? Never judge anyone for that, no matter how different it is from your own spiritual life, and what you think the canons of the churches or the rules of the church is at the time, okay? At the end of the day, if you don't want to be a Pharisee, you want to be authentic in what you're doing in your spiritual life, and you want to not be a hypocrite, right? And you want to always be humble about it, saying you are a work in progress, don't get self-righteous. And we're going to see how these can actually be detrimental to our spiritual lives. Okay?
Can I play the devil's advocate?
Sure.
On the idea of don't be a Pharisee, what was Jesus respond to the Pharisees, or how did he deal with them?
There's a few slides about that,
Okay.
so I'm going to get to that. Is that about that?
It could be.
Okay.
What's the line, or maybe you will define it, but like, is there a line between being a Pharisee and just being very disciplined?
That's a great question that I'm going to get to.
Thank
I
you.
promise. And if I don't, call me out. Yeah. Something I wanted to say about this, actually. If your fast is only food-based, if you're only reading nutrition labels, that's clearly not what fasting is about, right? So that's sort of what I meant by this, okay? I think you all know the answer to these questions. Just the way I asked it was maybe a little argumentative. But if you're only reading nutrition labels during a fast, you're not fasting, okay? And that's sort of what the Pharisees were doing. That's sort of what we're going to see that was the problem at the end of the day. But again, even if that's what someone's only doing during the fast, we're not to judge them for that, okay? Focus on yourself first. I'm going to continue. What did Christ say of the Pharisees, which was Samir's question? So in some place in Luke, he says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. There's another verse, I believe it's in Mark, where he says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Here he actually explains what it is, hypocrisy. And we know leaven is what causes the bread to rise, right? In Matthew, therefore, whatever they being the Pharisees, tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and they do not do. So Christ is actually saying the Pharisees have some correct teachings, do what they're telling you to do, but don't do according to their actions because they're actually not even carrying out what they're saying. Right? That's the big H word here, hypocrisy, or hypocrite. What's going on? Woe to you. I was going to have you read Matthew 23. The entire chapter is woe to you, but I'm not going to do that. Maybe have that. So can someone read this first verse for me? Anyone? Tony, read it.
For they bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers.
Okay. They is always going to be referring to Pharisees here. What does this mean?
They're hypocrites.
What kind of burdens? Mike?
So, like, they tell other people what to do and how to act, but they won't they won't do things themselves. Like, they'll have other people do things for them.
Right. Brady?
Well, this reminds me of the parable of like the guy who owed a large debt and then it was forgiven of him and then later on he wouldn't forgive other people. So pretty much like they're like they expect things to be done for them if they don't do that.
Right. Anything else? Yeah, basically they're setting out rules for other people who, you know, if you're a Pharisee, you think you're at the top, right? So you should be following everything you're saying, and they expect everyone under them to follow it, but they don't actually do what they're saying, right? They're being hypocrites. That's the basic foundation. This one's probably the most impactful. Can Deshoy, can you read this one?
For you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in.
Oh man. Imagine the Messiah who's coming to the world to save humanity saying this to you. You don't go to heaven and you prevent other people from going to heaven. And you're the person who's in a place of authority who should be like instructing the people, right? That's extremely powerful. So that's another thing that the Pharisees did. Fez, read this one.
Which one are you?
Third one.
No. For you pay tithe of men and human, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone.
We're going to get back to this. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. So you tithe, great, you tithe, but what did you forget about? You forgot faith, mercy, and justice. Extremely important things for our religion, right? Our faith. You cleanse the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of exhortation and self-indulgence. You appear to look like something outside, but inside you're something else. Another way of being hypocrite, right? Okay. We'll get back to the whole idea of these you ought to have done without leaving the others. What does that mean for us? In many places, the Pharisees told someone it's not lawful for them to do something. So what is this story of? What is this picture over here?
Take up your bed and walk.
Right.
Yeah.
Pool of Siloam, right? So the paralyzed man, after he was cured, the Jews therefore said to him who was cured, it is the Sabbath, it is not lawful for you to carry your bed and walk. There's a conversation here before we started about today being Friday night, the Sabbath. The Jews can't do work, right? Okay, well the Pharisees consider carrying your bed a type of work, right? But they're saying this to a paralyzed man who was just healed. Or to a walking man who was just paralyzed, right? Something similar happened to Christ's disciples when they were with him, and they were plucking grain, and the Pharisees saw it and said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to be done on the Sabbath, right? Plucking grain, they considered it to be work. Did Christ and his disciples actually break the Sabbath? Or did this man break the Sabbath by carrying up his bed? The bigger question, did Jesus break the Sabbath by healing someone on the Sabbath? These are really important questions, right? We're going to have to come back to that to see when the Pharisees condemned Jesus, or when the high priest condemned Jesus, were they justified or not in doing that, right? Okay, fine. Let's just assume for a second that it's not lawful to carry your bed, it's not lawful for you to heal someone on the Sabbath, and it's not lawful for you to pluck grain on the Sabbath, okay? We're going to make that assumption. Fine. Is it lawful for you to sentence an innocent man to death? Because that's what the high priest did, right? We know from Matthew 27, the chief priest took silver pieces and said, it is not lawful to put them in the treasury because they are the price of blood. 30 pieces meaning they gave Judas 30 pieces of silver, right? He sold, or he brought Jesus to them, or brought them to Jesus. And you have to wrap your head around this. So, I won't say Pharisees, but chief priests, because that's what's said here, right? The chief priests are okay with giving someone 30 pieces of silver to arrest that person and bring them to death, right? But they're not okay with putting that silver in the treasury because they're the price of blood. Does that resonate with anyone as being weird? Yeah, totally.
From our perspective, it's obviously weird, but like, to them, they were genuinely convinced that this guy is like,
Guilty.
he's someone that's blaspheming, like he's literally, like, they believed he was demonic, if anything. You know, so to them, they think they did the right thing. And they still are operating in the sense that they're doing what is right and that they probably shouldn't put this money into the treasury.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. Sylvia?
No, it's not.
It's fair. Let's just, okay.
I was just gonna argue against it.
Sure, go for it.
So they did know that he was an innocent man. They just didn't like his message, and they didn't like the power that he was getting. And they very actively took steps to break their own law to make sure that he got condemned. And then they brought him to Pilate, and Pilate was like, he didn't do anything wrong. They were like, no, crucify him. And Pilate took their word for it. They were just like, oh, we're going to put it to death because he won't stop rioting. Not because there was an actual judgment passed about him.
So if I was to say, I had anticipated that question, and I agree with her, that would be my way of copping out, right? It'd be a cop-out, right? When I told you that's exactly what I anticipated. Mark 14. Is it lawful, that's not magic, is it lawful for you to condemn someone without your testimonies agreeing? In Mark 14. Like, we don't read this in like, with emotion. We can't just, oh, their testimonies did not agree, they sentenced Jesus to death. No, Mark is like, their testimonies did not agree, and according to the law, your testimonies have to agree to sentence someone to death. But on multiple occasions, it says that their testimonies did not agree, but they carried on with the trial anyways. You know? So even within their sort of grand scheme, or their scheming, there was issues there that were not lawful, but they kept doing it anyways, because it fits their agenda. Mike, you had something.
No, I was just gonna say, I'm not sure if I'm correct, but weren't there like a small handful of high priests or Pharisees who actually, even if they weren't 100% convinced that Christ was Lord, there were those who at least thought this was like a prophet, or this was somebody who, you know, we should at least revere or not do this to.
100%. There were multiple cases where it says there was a schism among them, there was a division among them.
Nicodemus is one of them.
Nicodemus is one,
John
Paul is
the
another.
And Youssef from Joseph of Arimathea.
So not all the Pharisees were bad. Again, it was sort of a political party. I'd say that the Bible sort of portrays as most of them being this way.
No, because I think they're like, during the, like, leading up to the trial and during the trial, they tried, like, I remember reading, I forget in this book, that they were saying that this is wrong, this is there's nothing to do, and they just sort of like shrugged them off or kicked them out.
Brady had something to say.
No, I was gonna say that, something about the first verse is that they like knew that they were guilty, which is why they didn't use that. Like, if they thought it was an okay thing for them to crucify this person or to murder this person, then they would have just, like, what's wrong with using that money again? You know what I mean? But it's almost as if that they knew that they were guilty and they knew that it was something wrong that they were doing, that they were like, oh, we can't.
That's what the treasury is meaning for the temple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, we can't use this money for good anymore
Right.
because it's already been tainted by something that we did that was bad.
That's sort of the,
Yeah.
the main point.
Yeah.
Sure. Yes.
It also seems like they weren't that sure about like the judgment.
Mhm.
They were like, oh, is he bad? Is he good? They're not really sure about what to do.
Yeah, so during the trial, there was a bunch of different, like, oh, this man said he's going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Their testimony, there's no doubt that that was said. The question is, what did he mean by that, right? And so their testimonies did not agree then. Oh, he said, and then at the end, it's like, are you the Son of God? He says, I am. And they're like, what more need do we have of testifying? Like, we can see that he's blaspheming. That's excellent. Is it lawful to be self-righteous? This is actually a parable. Christ is saying, the Pharisee stood and prayed thus within himself, God, I thank you that I'm not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. Is it lawful for you to judge others and to be self-righteous and to have pride? Don't think so, right? That was the issue. So even though they think they're being meticulous in what's necessary in their faith, they were neglecting so many other weightier matters, right? Which is something that we don't want to do today. It's really hot, right?
Yes.
Can we open like a window or a door, please?
We can open the door.
I don't feel hungry.
I'm freezing.
I feel hungry.
Okay. So we talked about some examples about Christ healing on the Sabbath, or plucking grain on the Sabbath, right? Carrying your bed on the Sabbath. We also talked about was it lawful or not what some of the Pharisees were doing. What does the law actually say about the Sabbath? Okay? So, a longer verse, who's going to read from it? Here or Youssef, you're going to read.
6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gate. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
Okay. That's what the law of Moses says. That's Exodus 20, the commandments. Seems pretty strong. Not you or your son or your daughter or your servant or your cattle. No one is to do work, right? That's what the law says. There's a lot of gray area here, right? What does work mean? Does that mean I don't walk around? Walking requires energy. We know that from physics, right? Does that mean I don't lift up heavy things? Does that mean I don't make food for myself? Does that mean I don't do something that gives me money, right? I don't go in. There's a lot of gray area here. And so the whole issue, the whole problem was that the Pharisees sort of had the freedom to make their own interpretation of this law, right? And so they started making these, I don't want to say crazy, but yeah, kind of crazy rules that the society had to conform with to be abiding by this law. Does that make sense? So the law itself is pretty clear, don't do work, but there's still a lot of gray area within what work means, right? This Sunday, the gospel reading is going to be the man born blind. I was going to have you read the entire thing, but that's like 50 verses and we don't have time for that. 41. The gist of it, who can summarize for us? The man born blind. Is about a man born blind? I'll summarize with it. Mena, yeah? Man was born blind. Okay, Jesus comes up to him, it's the Sabbath. Puts clay on his eyes, he goes to the pool, washes, he's healed. He goes and tells, they brought him to the Pharisees. The Pharisees keep questioning. They end up excommunicating him and throwing him out of the temple, right? This is one example of healing on the Sabbath, what the person did, right? He was convicted and he told the truth when he was questioned by the Pharisees, and he was excommunicated for it. Fine. Paralyzed man, we just discussed the same thing. Man was paralyzed for 38 years. Christ comes to him on the Sabbath. Do you want to be made well? Yes, Lord, I do. Carry up your bed and walk. The Pharisees see, okay, not lawful because you are carrying your bed on a Sabbath day. Man with a withered hand. Another example. Man comes with a withered hand, and actually says the Pharisees were observing him intently to see whether or not he would heal him on the Sabbath day. So they're like looking with intention. And so Christ asked them, is it lawful for a man to heal on the Sabbath? They don't respond to him. He heals him, and it says they sought from that hour to take his life. So I want to do a thought. You just showed 3 examples: paralyzed man, man born blind, man with a withered hand. Okay, all 3 done on the Sabbath day. Thought experiment for all of you. We're in a hospital. A lot of you are from medical fields. In a hospital with, let's say, this crazy disease. I don't want to say coronavirus because it's like, crazier. Uncurable disease. Okay, uncurable, and the person has physical manifestations of that. Can't see, can't walk, can't talk, can't do anything. Okay, and this is in a hospital. And on the case, because it's such a rare case, there's doctors, there are nurses, there are physician assistants, there's every doctor you can think about, every person in the medical field, okay? Let's say there's 10 people on the case. And let's say this person can't be left alone, so they're always being monitored, okay? All of a sudden, something happens, and that person is cured, okay? Person can run and walk, the person can talk, look, everything. So he gets up, and he's running up and down the halls of this is actually, I think, New York Presbyterian hospital. And he's running up and down, because he's joyful, right? I was sick for how long, and now I can do all this stuff. And then the same 10 people, like, bro, what are you doing? You can't run in a hospital. Get out of here. That's essentially what the Pharisees did. The man was born blind, and his parents said he was born blind, right? And now he sees. The paralyzed man was there for 38 years. That's more than like 2 of your ages put together. He was paralyzed for that long, and then he can now walk. The man with the withered hand, it was healed in front of the Pharisees' eyes. So why are you kicking the person out for that? For what? For being healed? Why? Right? So there comes a certain point where like the healing's coming from somewhere. I know Tony mentioned that the healing's coming from like demonic powers, right? But we know, like, okay, if Satan casts out Satan, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
We know what the prophets said about this. You're Pharisees, you should know the prophets and the law. So why are you rejecting this type of healing? Just because it's happening on the Sabbath. And I really love Christ's response to this. So I want someone to read. Mena.
Jesus answered and said to them, I did one work, and you all marvel. Moses therefore gave you circumcision, not that it is from Moses, but from the fathers, and you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath, so that the law of Moses should not be broken, are you angry with me because I made a man completely well on the Sabbath? Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment.
Oh man, this is like savage. This is like
Blatant.
Logic 101. So this is John chapter 7, and Jesus is most likely referring to the man, the paralyzed man, because that was John chapter 5, who was healed on the Sabbath. So the person has to be circumcised on the 8th day, okay? That was the law of Moses. Circumcised on the 8th day. Let's say you're born on Friday. What's 8 days from Friday? Saturday. So what are you going to do? The person has to be circumcised on the 8th day, but we can't do work on the 8th day. What do we do? What do the Jews do? I actually looked this up. And the Jews do circumcise on the 8th day. If a person is born on Friday, they will circumcise the child on the 8th day. Okay, so Christ is saying, if you circumcise on the 8th day, and what does circumcision mean? Circumcision means initiation of that person into our community, right? Sort of, if you will, the salvation of that person. He's now part of us, and they're going to grow with our community, and they're going to now be saved in the end, right? So he's saying, if a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath, why are you angry with me that I made a man completely well on the Sabbath? Just as you are doing some sort of work, right, on the Sabbath, for the good of that person, circumcision is something good. Why are you condemning me for healing a person, right? Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. This is the takeaway from today, if you don't get anything else. Does it make sense? When I read this, I was like, wow. Okay, let's talk about something we love to talk about here in Queens. The letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. This is going to go back to the questions in the beginning, fasting, by looking at nutrition labels, all this stuff. I don't claim to know the answers, I'm just giving you some of the ideas and what I've read. In my personal opinion, you're going to correct me if I say anything out of line. When we say the letter and the spirit of the law, we say that we live in the New Testament. We're not bound by the law. Okay, yes, we're not bound by the law because Christ has fulfilled the law and we are alive through Christ. Okay. This does not mean that this is an excuse for us to bend or break the law. And by law, I mean the rules of the church, the canons of the church, what the church has preserved for us, okay? So in my opinion, the spirit of the law does not mean just an excuse to break these things. And contrary to popular belief, rules were not made to be broken. People love to say that nowadays. I don't know why. It's a postmodern society that we live in. Drives me nuts. There's a reason why, if it says don't walk, you don't walk, right? On the street. There's a reason why if it's a red light, you don't cut that red light, right? At the same time, I want to dare to say, it's actually okay to be meticulous. What do I mean? It's actually okay to be very diligent in your practice of your faith. Whether that means praying, whether that means fasting, whether that means going to church. In my opinion, it's okay to actually follow things very closely and be strict with yourself. The issue comes when you start to neglect weightier matters, right? So, if you say, I'm going to take the spirit of the law. The spirit of the law, as Christ sort of attested to, love God, love your neighbor. Okay, I love others and I love God. I forgive others, I reach out to all others. I love God, He knows it. I'm perfectly good. That's the spirit of the law, right? But there's a bunch of other things. There's fasting, participating in service, and in the sacraments, Eucharist, confession, right? It's praying, tithing, reading the Bible, having a relationship with Christ. These are all sort of outward expressions of what it means, what the law means, so to speak. One second. In my opinion, these you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. I'm not going to say what each person should be doing. That's between you and your father of confession and your mentors. But we can't just be taking things very lightly in terms of just the spirit, how I feel this stuff means. That's what I'm going to be doing. There's a reason why the church has preserved certain things for us to actually be in constant communication and union with God. Mike.
I think nowadays people focus on the spirit of the law so much and they make that their aim without realizing the way to get there is through the letter of the law. You know, you need the letter of the law to sort of give you that physical, tangible means of discipline to achieve the spirit.
Yeah.
You know, and even such as, you know, the monks and our forefathers and all of them, if you look, they kept the letter in order to achieve the spirit, if that makes sense. So you kind of, you know, you can't just jump into the spirit of the law. Just like you can't, you know, like in basketball, you can't go straight into making 10 three-pointers in a row. You got to practice it. And so that kind of, you know, you can't have the spirit without the letter.
Sure. I'm going to get back to that in a second. Antonio?
I just like to say I agree with everything you say. I think it's very smart. But what would you say to someone what would you say to someone who who gets caught up in trying to focus so much on the letter that they lose some of the spirituality?
This is what you say. You say, these you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Doesn't matter how many nutrition labels you read, if you're missing out on the bigger picture, you just lost an opportunity.
Two things to add to what you just said. Christ says, I did not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. Second thing is, the law is a tutor. A tutor, just like you said, you need to go through the law in order to reach the perfection of the Spirit. So we shouldn't leave those things undone. Those are the first things, and then over time we acquire the Spirit.
I wanted to make a comment to what Mike said. The reason why we can't take the spirit of the law on our own is because what is our interpretation of what the spirit of the law is outside of the church? It doesn't exist. Not to offend anyone, it doesn't matter what your spirit of the law is if it's outside of the church, right? What does that mean? It has no foundation, right? And I'm going to keep going back to this verse. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Do not neglect the weightier matters, love, faith.
Mercy, joy, mercy, justice.
Long suffering.
It's faith, justice, and mercy.
Faith, justice, and mercy. Is my point clear? Okay. Christ himself did not go around breaking laws. There's this misconception, right, outside of Christianity. Like, oh, he came and he did all these things and he healed on the Sabbath. We just talked about healing on the Sabbath. Is that breaking the law or not? Raise your hand if you think healing on the Sabbath is breaking the law. Okay, good. We're on the same page. No, Christ did not break the law. He gave us a deeper understanding. Okay? Examples of this. Sermon on the Mount. You have heard of old, you shall not murder. Fine. No one's going to argue. But he takes it one step further. Do not speak bad about your brother, right? Because otherwise you've committed murder in your heart. He didn't break the law. He just took it a step further. You have heard you should not commit adultery. Okay? Still don't commit adultery. But even if you look at someone with a lustful eye, you have committed adultery in your heart. You have heard, do not swear falsely. Still, don't swear falsely. But there was this thing which I think is crazy. They were saying if you swear by the temple, you're good. If you break the oath, no problem. If you swear by the gold in the temple, nope. That's a big problem. That's like me saying, if you swear by the altar, it's a big problem. But if you swear by the body of Christ, that's on the altar, you're good, you can break it, it's fine. Makes no sense, right? Which is more important? Something I found really amazing when I read it. So why do I have this picture here? What is this? It's the tomb, right? With the stone still, actually no, I think it's rolled. But pretend that it's covering it. So something that I found amazing is Christ in his death. So Christ was crucified what day? Friday. What hour? 6th hour. He died at the 9th hour. So he was crucified on a Friday, died on a Friday. Right? And they were sort of rushing to get him into the tomb. Why? Because the next day was the Sabbath. Christ even fulfilled the law in his death, because even on Saturday he was resting in the tomb. That blew my mind. Right? So even in his death, Christ was fulfilling the law. Nowhere does Christ actually break the law. Even in his death. Okay? So anywhere we sort of see a contradiction where we think, oh, maybe something's a little weird there, or oh, they're causing him, they're saying something about him, he broke a law. Read a little bit further into it, you'll see that actually he just gave us a deeper understanding. So, when it comes to not being a Pharisee, which is what this talk was really about in the beginning, and understanding what that means, suppose I got this is actually the title of a book that Abuna is reading, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. I like this picture a lot. I think a lot of us at work, we have a boss that's dictating things and we sort of have to drive into the mission. But a good boss and a good leader is with us, right? With us in that mission. And we know that God is with us in that mission, in that goal. And to lead by example. And just, we won't read this, but the tax collector in the parable, he wasn't in a position of, so it was a Pharisee and a tax collector. The Pharisee was self-righteous, and the tax collector was beating his chest. God be merciful to me, a sinner. Even though this is a parable, okay, which is a story, the tax collector is not in a position of power, right? Tax collector is a sinner. Tax collector is known to be the lowest of the low in that community. But yet, we learned a lesson from them, right? We learned to be humble. So tax collector is actually leading when he's in no position to lead anything or take charge of anything. So I think we should be the same way in our lives. So what should we watch out for? I think these are the big three when it comes to not being a Pharisee. We shouldn't be hypocrites. There's a very big difference. Actually, let's define it. Hypocrisy is saying something and intentionally not following it. This is very different than you knowing something is wrong, you struggling, and you falling into some sort of sin. The two are very different, right? And so Christ says specifically, hypocrisy is the issue with the Pharisees. Don't preach something and then do something else intentionally. Judgment, we should not be condemning others or judging others, right? Depending on how they're living their lives. Focus on yourself. The Pharisees were very known for condemning everyone around them. And then not looking within themselves. And not looking within themselves is related to pride, right? I am okay because I come to church on Sunday. I am okay because I fast some Wednesdays, some Fridays. I fast the entire Lent, so I'm okay. communion 3 out of 4 weeks in a month. I'm okay. What does all this stuff mean, right? So, I like this a lot, the I in pride, but if we had to like sort of summarize the Pharisees, me personally, I'd choose these 3 things. These are the 3 things that we want to avoid. That's actually all I have. So, any comments or questions? We can talk about it now. Did I offend anyone?
The Pharisees problem.
I probably offended the Pharisees. Think twice before calling someone a Pharisee, if that's something that you do. Yes, sir.
Also, when I think about the Pharisees, I think about like the idea that someone could be saying something or doing something that's right by the Bible, but then they themselves, if they don't act in like that way with the Spirit, and then you might take it in that way, like I'm not going to do this because this person, like you kind of put it on the Bible or on God that they're acting in this way, so I don't want to be associated with that kind of thing.
I had a similar thought.
Like for example, if you have
No, because I don't know exactly what I'm
like
saying.
let's say you have a friend that, or not a friend, let's say you have someone that bullies you, right, for example, but then that person, they post, like, verses, or like you see them going to church, or they're fasting also. So then you would like, oh, I'm not going to like associate with I don't care for Christianity because of that bully.
Oh, right. So that person's sort of being a hypocrite because they're not carrying what they're supposed to be preaching, and so that hypocrisy can actually turn someone away.
Yeah, but also it kind of like forms the Christianity from Christ and then from like the people themselves that are Christians.
No, I agree, 100%. I really had an example to share. If someone's trying to be, okay, I'll tell you an actual story that happened. This woman, I believe it was in Upper Egypt. It was Lent. Okay, we know Lent is the pinnacle of like fasting in our church, so everything's very strict. They're stricter usually in Egypt than here. And so this woman, she was cooking for the guests, and she was like, she was with someone else who was in the kitchen, and the other woman was going to use a pot, just a pot, okay, to make food. We're fasting, so she was gonna make food or something, right? And the other woman went crazy. She's like, "No, what are you doing? We used that pot during Lent. We had butter in it." So she's like, "No, the pot is not fasting. We can't use that pot." In our mind, that's utterly ridiculous, right? Like that's crazy. But perhaps to that woman, this is how she's actually. This is her level of spirituality. She's like, I'm fasting, and everything in my environment is to be fasting. So while we may be condemning her or thinking this woman is just crazy, maybe that's actually a genuine offering to God, right? Her level of spirituality is so high that we can't even comprehend that. So I'd very much caution either way. Caution judging a whole community based off what someone's saying, or caution judging one person based off their actions. Because you never know what's actually in that person's heart, right? Yes.
I just want to say something to be cautious about. And sometimes following the letter is much easier than following the spirit. So it's much easier for me to fast and read labels than to love. So I take care of this because this is much easier for me and neglect this. So we have to be very careful with that. As you said, I think the conclusion is do both. Like, don't just be satisfied with following the letter without the spirit. I don't think you're gaining anything by reading the labels if you're not loving.
100%.
So that's a fine line كده. That's what I see. People might feel easier for them to follow the law on expense of the spirit of the law or the letter of the law.
Anything else?